again. There are a number of people who couldn't make it, so that's why I'm video recording this whole thing. And like I said, I know this is not the best of timing, but I need you to understand what has happened, where we're at. And the reason we're doing it this way is because I don't want to cause chaos within the church. I don't want to cause panic within the church. But I'm pretty sure that what I'm about to tell you may startle you a bit. If you haven't heard any of us talking about it before, it may startle you even now. So let's start with a word of prayer, and then we'll start sharing. Father, I thank and praise you for this time, and I praise and thank you for those that are on the church council and those that have been invited to come to this meeting. Lord, I pray that you would speak to us about Lutheran Church of the Master. We're not looking for solutions right now. We're looking to understand where we are and how we got here. And in doing that, what then we'll figure out what we're supposed to do. So, Holy Spirit, speak to each one of us in Jesus' name. Amen. Now, I've had an opportunity to share what I'm sharing with you. I've had an opportunity to share this with our staff and with our church council at our council retreat. And as I sat down and started looking and searching and figuring out, I started feeling the weight or the pressure of these statistics, these numbers, to explain where we're at. And so that you know, once I started sharing them and I shared them with our church council, we had a couple on our church council that have already gone through what we're going to be talking about. They've lived it and they've seen it, and maybe you have too. And that's why it's all based upon this book, and I'll give you one of these. It's called Autopsy of a Deceased Church. As I was just in prayer and Bible study and reading through some things, I ran across this book. You notice it's just a little itty-bitty book. But in this little itty-bitty book, Thom, who writes for Lifeway, he interviewed 14 churches that died. They were closed already. Now, so that you know, we close 4,000 to 5,000 churches every year in the United States. All right? It's not a new phenomenon. 4,000 to 5,000 churches. And the reason we don't necessarily notice it is because when you divide that amongst 50 states, it doesn't come out. So it's 100 churches here in Minnesota, but that doesn't all mean they're in Brooklyn Center or Brooklyn Park. So we don't necessarily hear about it, and we don't think in these terms. So I sat down and I read the book. He interviewed 14 churches that died, and he interviewed the people within the churches. And as he interviewed the people in the churches, he discovered 11 symptoms that caused their death. And as I read through those 11 symptoms, I thought to myself, we have about 8, 9 of these, which probably isn't a good sign. Which drove me to do some study, do some research. So let me start here. How many of you are familiar with the concept of a paradigm? Do you know what a paradigm is? If you were to define paradigm, what's a paradigm?
A way of doing things.
A way of doing things. Perfect. It's a pattern. An example, a model. That's a paradigm. It's a set of rules and regulations by which we live by. So you may be the kind of person that your alarm is set every day for the same time. You get up, you do the exact same routine every day. Don't take you out of the routine. Maybe the first thing you do is you have a cup of coffee. Then you go brush your teeth or make yourself up for the day. But you have a set of rules and regulations and you live by them. Can you think of a paradigm that we might have here at Lutheran Church of the Master? Now, before you answer that, I'll let you think a little bit. Before you answer that, let me preface all of this by saying I am not trying to be critical or judgmental about anything that we are doing or have done, things that have been done here at LCM. I'm not trying to be negative. I'm trying to be as positive as I can. But in that being positive, we've also got to be truthful. So what might possibly be a paradigm, a set of rules and regulations that we do here at Lutheran Church of the Master? Our order of service. We have an order of service. We follow the order of service. Good. Very good. What else? Huh? Confirmation is always on Wednesday night. Choir. Choir is always on Wednesday night.
Wednesday noon prayer.
Wednesday noon prayer.
Committee meetings are always on Tuesday.
Who?
Committee meetings, church council.
Okay, always on Tuesday. See, we have rules and regulations here. The problem with the rules and regulations is most often with paradigms, people don't know what the paradigms are. And so when new people come in, they have no clue why we do what we do or how we do it. And most often we don't explain it to them, and they don't ask. All right, so I share that with you because what happens is when you have paradigms, when a new person comes or a new set of rules is injected, there's what's called a paradigm shift. Okay? And so when you have a paradigm shift, there's a break from those rules, and when that shift occurs, everyone starts back at zero. I know, that's real exciting, isn't it? Let me see if I can explain it to you the way I explain it to my family. We had our own paradigm. The Mark and Julie Markshausen family, we had paradigms. This was our rules and regulations within our household. And all the kids came, but when a new child came, everybody started back at zero because that child doesn't know the paradigm. They've got to learn the paradigm. Then those children go up, and as they grow up, they interject and get married and interject someone new into the family. And I kept telling them, what you don't understand is we all start back at zero. See, what we think is, no, they should catch up to us. These are our paradigms. They have to come to our level. That never happens. You can tell yourself that till you're blue in the face. Billy, I love you dearly. But when you married Keena, we all started back at zero. Okay, whether we wanted to or not. Why? Because Billy didn't know our paradigms. He probably still doesn't understand them. It's like, why do you people do that? You know, but there's paradigms within a church, and we assume everybody knows our paradigms. And everybody understands our paradigms, and they don't. And so we all step back, and if we'll all step back, we all learn to walk at a new beat. Now, think about this for a moment. What are some paradigm shifts that you could think of that have happened here at Lutheran Church of the Master?
New pastor.
New pastor. Didn't matter which one. New pastor comes, or are you just talking about the latest one?
No.
Just asking, John. That was a change. New pastor comes, paradigm shift. We all start back at zero, right? And it, 3 to 2 services. There was probably a time there was only 1 service, 2. And then you went to 2 services. And people went, oh my gosh, we're not going to see each other. And then you went to 3 services. And that caused even more. And then you went back down to 2 services, right? Yeah, paradigm shift. Everybody now what service are we going to go to? Right? Yeah, what time? Yeah. And by the way, who picked those times? Don't laugh so hard, Kathy, okay? Another paradigm shift here. Multicultural, yeah. For the most part, back in 1960, this was predominantly, very predominantly, white Caucasian, right? Things changed, right? Culture changed. What's another paradigm shift?
11 o'clock service.
11 o'clock service, contemporary.
Very contemporary.
Yeah, absolutely, compared to traditional. Paradigm shift, we all.
Compared to what even the contemporary service was before, it's really different.
Really?
Yeah.
That's good to know. You heard the same one? Anybody else? Any other paradigm shifts you can think of?
Bible study in the middle of it.
Bible study in the, how ingenious, how inconsiderate, but how ingenious. Who would think of that? Having Bible study when everybody is here.
Everybody can come.
Everybody starts back at zero, yeah. Sunday school has evolved numerous times and ways. Everybody starts back at zero. Well, we didn't want to, though, did we? No, we all want everybody else to catch up with us. But let me tell you what happens. You're not even going to read this in the book. I could write a whole book on paradigms within churches and how they kill churches, okay? But when there's a paradigm and a paradigm shift, most churches and most institutions don't go back to zero. We all want to stay where we're at. You catch up. And how often does this happen? Why do you think it's easier why do you think it's easier to give birth to something new than to resurrect something that's dead? Yeah. Giving new life. Why do you think new? My point is this. New churches, new church plants, they're booming. Okay? Why? People want new life. It's hard to resurrect the dead. And if we got to resurrect the dead, there's so much time and energy and effort that goes into that. Okay? Just giving you that. So let me share with you some traumatic experiences that I've noticed about the history here. Here again, I want you to know, I'm not pointing fingers. I'm not accusing in any way. I'm trying to be very not neutral in this, okay? So through the course of time, which isn't new to anything else, there have been some youth pastors who have gotten into trouble, right? Yep, and that's traumatic. When there's trauma to the body, all right? I'll just take my finger. Traumatic, all right? Traumatic. I can do this. That's all. It was trauma to this finger especially, but it was traumatic to my whole body. My whole body has had to learn how to readjust, how to play piano, how to type. I've got and it's amazing what your mind can do when you're forced to do it. But it was trauma, and it hurt throughout my body. Okay, just didn't hurt this finger; it hurt elsewhere. Trauma. So a youth pastor does some unscrupulous things and immoral things, however you want to say it, and it causes hurt to the body. Yeah. All right? And we'll just be very specific here. Pastor Bob leaves. All right? Pastor Bob was kind of brought on staff here, groomed here, he took over here for a number of years. Pastor Bob leaves. Now, and I'm just giving you this as an outsider now. And for those of you who are new to this church, you haven't seen it. Pastor Bob is a very good friend of mine. I love him dearly. But there was trauma that was involved, all right? Pastor Bob is, as far as I know, very involved with church growth. We have to grow this church. We're going to grow this church. We're going to have 1,000 people in worship. Am I right? For those of you who've been here? Pushing that, right? Church growth. And he made it happen to a certain extent. But now he leaves. And I read there was Vision 2000, I think it was.
1,000 and 2,000.
Huh? 2,000 by 2,000? 1,000 by 2,000. And he leaves in 98, 99, whenever, right before that, right? Whether you liked him or didn't like him, I'm not here to take a vote. The point is there was a vision that was lost and trauma that was caused to the body. All right? It was a traumatic experience. Not only that, but then he fires Pastor Carl, right? I didn't know Pastor Carl. I know Pastor Bob. I'm not saying it was the right decision or wrong decision. What I'm saying is that caused angst within the church. It was traumatic. Okay? Now, as I've tried to explain before, when there is trauma, I'm going to use the example of a little girl who has been sexually abused by an adult. a male adult, okay? She's 5 years old. Sexually abused, and now through the course of life, she's now 35 years old. But let me tell you something about her. There's a part of her that is still 5. Okay? Because something inside of her died that day. And it never caught up with the rest of her. Okay? Not until there's some kind of deliverance or breakthrough. So when there's trauma to the body, whether you caused it, it was intentional, doesn't make any difference. Listen, I didn't stick my finger into that saw blade to see what would happen. Okay? It was an accident. It happened. All right? Some things are not always intentional. But there was trauma that happened, and there's probably other things that happened before 1998, 99, okay? But at that point, there was a turn in the history of Lutheran Church of the Master. All right? And I'm going to show that to you in just a minute. Here's another one. Pastor Mark. And Pastor Mark leaves. All right? Here again. I wasn't here. I don't know the situation. I'm not here to say he was right or wrong. That's all beside the point. But let's agree it was traumatic. You didn't have to all agree that much. But it caused trauma within this body. Traumatic experience. All right? So now you have something so out of control. And a lot of people, a lot of church people are quiet. They're quiet observers. All right? And they don't say anything, but they're so hurt. Right? And they're not going to stand up, and they're not going to speak out. They're not going to speak their piece. But what they'll do is they'll just go away. Right? Because it hurts. It's trauma. It was trauma with Pastor Mark. Then Pastor Morris comes. Pastor Morris brings calming waters, but Pastor Morris takes Lutheran Church of the Master out of the ELCA. All right? Now, I've said this before. I said this to the staff so that you know if this church would have still been in the ELCA, I would not have interviewed. And you're probably wishing you probably were still in the ELCA. I would not have interviewed just because I am not a liberal thinker. I'm very conservative when it comes to the Word of God. Okay? And I couldn't put myself in that position. I wouldn't have said anything, would have been said, it's not anything bad about Lutheran Church of the Master. But what I want you to know is, like any other church body, let's say the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod, that was my family. All right? That's, my relatives were all a part of that. They still are. My grandfather, my uncles, they were all pastors and teachers in the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod. So when I left, that was traumatic. This is my family. A lot of the pastors that I've talked to that were in the ELCA, they did not agree, and they did not like what was happening within their synod. But that was their family. Generations of family. Their great-grandfather, for heaven's sakes, was a pastor. And it's been passed down. There's been generations of that. They did not want to leave the ELCA, but when push came to shove in 2010, that was finally it. All right? There were people here that left because of leaving the ELCA. All right? I'm not saying it was right or wrong, but it happened. And it was trauma to this body. All right? So let's see if I can help you understand this. Well, there were probably plenty of things prior to 1998, 99. But when that happened, a part of LCM died. All right? And even if it didn't die, it grew a little bit. But then there was another traumatic experience. And it didn't die here. It goes back to here. And then it kind of catches up again. And then there's another traumatic experience. And instead of starting over here, it goes back to here. Okay? So we're always going back to here when the initial explosion occurred. All right? Or explosions. All right? And that's the life of the church. And then I came. Okay? We won't go there today. All right? So I want to point this out to you in picture form. Okay? If that's not picturesque. All right, that's over the last 20 years. right? Just the last 20 years. So let me share my findings. So as I was in prayer one morning, I sensed the Lord saying to me, I want you to go back over the last 5 years and look at worship attendance. So I went back to 2010. Now, I came in December of 2011. But from 2010 to 2015, our average worship attendance is like 316. All right? So last 5 years, it was 321, 324, 318, 302, 316. Somewhere in that 316-ish, 318 is the average. Well, as the good news in all of that is we've leveled off. We're pretty level. I mean, 316, 321, give or take a couple, okay. We've leveled off. That's the good news. So then I really says the Holy Spirit saying, I want you to go back the last 10 years. So I went back to 2005. Average worship attendance over the years sounds like this: 449, 460, 410, 336, 334. In the last 10 years, we have dropped in our worship attendance 30%. 30% of our worship attendance is gone. Now, if you lost 30% of your health, do you think you'd be smiling? I mean, 30% is still 30%, depending on what, but we can seriously say, well, we still got 70% left, right? But 30%, you're probably not feeling the best, okay? You're feeling kind of down, all right? So then I really sensed the Holy Spirit saying, I want you to go back another 10 years. So I went back 20 years, 1995. Well, there were no records. I can't find any records from 1995 to 1999. But I did find prior to that, and I found 1994. 1994, the average worship attendance was 780. 780 to now, 20 years, we've lost 60%. So how do you feel now? If you lost 60% of your health, how would you feel? Yeah, not so good. Okay, we've lost 60%. The highest average worship attendance was in 1992. That was 826. And now we're at 316. Okay, let me see if I can make you feel worse. The highest membership here at Lutheran Church of the Master, membership, just membership, okay, was in 1990. In 1990, so that's 25 years ago. 1990, the highest membership was 2,587. Almost 2,600 members. Now, there's some scrutiny about that because understand that back in the day, the older pastors, they never took anybody off the membership list. Okay? You could be dead for 5 years and they still didn't take you off. They'd like make sure that you were really dead and not coming back. All right? They never took anybody off the membership list. That was the old way of thinking. But nonetheless, the number still is almost 2,600. Anybody want to take a guess at what, except for Janet? Because I asked her for the numbers. Anybody want to take a guess at what our active membership is, our present active membership is today?
780.
780. Good guess. 650. 500.
200.
That's a little too low. Thank you for leveling that out, though. Our active membership is 451. We have 59 on the inactive or pending list, so that's 510. Did you know 510 from 2,600 is 80%? And if we use the 451 active, that's 83%. In the last 20 years, we've lost 83% of our membership. I'll just let that soak in for a minute. Here again, as I share this with the staff and I share this with the church council, I said, see, there's no way I can get up on a Sunday morning and preach this. This is depressing, isn't it? For those of you who have been here for a long time, this is heart-wrenching. I can feel it. It's heart-wrenching for me. 83%. So, in and amongst that comes this autopsy of a deceased church. And like I said, out of the 11 symptoms that he identified in those 14 dying churches, we have 8, 9 of them. So we had to start someplace. And so I talked to the staff, and we as a staff, so Diane, Christina, Dr. Julie, Stacy, Pastor John, Pastor Dan, and myself, we sat down every week, and we went through this book, one chapter at a time. And let me tell you, those were not fun meetings. They were hard. Because eventually, you got to get past the denial stage, and you have to start talking truth. And it's nobody's fault, okay? We're not looking for fault here. We're not looking to point our finger at anybody. That's none of this. It's about realizing where we are and being able to talk about it. And so, even in doing that, what I found with the staff is we wanted the solution. But what's the solution? We're not talking about the solution. You cannot talk about the solution until you've identified the problem. You can't answer the question. You can't give an answer if you don't know what the question is. We've got to identify the question before we can come up with a solution. And that's where you come in. Because I ask each one of the staff, one of the ways we're going to get out of this is by small group ministry. And, I realize time is always of the essence. You have lots of things to do, right? Your life is busy. Don't necessarily want to add one more thing. I get it. I'm there too. But if we don't, I've already told this to the church council. Here again, I'd never say this in front of the congregation. I wish you wouldn't either. For 7 years, I worked as a church consultant. I helped churches, dying churches, conflict resolution. And if I had to tell you, I'm not a prophet, I'm not the son of a prophet. I'm not that sanctified. Some people wonder if I'm even saved. But if I had to tell you how long we have left, I would tell you 5 to 7 years. Ten at the max, but let me tell you, the last 3 years will be excruciating. It'll be so painful. It'll be a slow burn, death. Do you understand now why I can't say this in front of the congregation? Because it would crush them. But we've got to start someplace. So I sat down with the staff and we went through the book we just finished. We involved the church council. And so we've asked all of the council members to be in one of our groups, including their spouses. And we've identified some other people. You're not the only ones. I mean, and part of it has to do with you're involved with the ministry or you're in a special relationship. But what this is going to look like is we're going to ask you to be in a small group meet with that small group, and we're going to go through this book. I'm going to give you this book today if you don't already have one. We're going to ask you to go through this book. And in our small group time, we are going to go through 2 lessons a time, okay? 2 chapters. They're just short chapters. But I need you to talk with each other. I need you to talk in your group. I need you to share. If you're mad, say, you know what, I'm mad. If you're depressed, say, I'm so depressed. But we've got to talk about this. And we've got to figure it out sooner than later. So each one of the staff will oversee. They will lead the small group. I've put together a video. You know, you've heard of us. We use this Right Now media, and hopefully you're using that. And if you have access to a computer or a laptop, whether you do your small group in your home or McDonald's, I don't care. If you want to do it here at church, we can do it here at church. But you can sit down, and I've done a 3 to 5 minute video about each chapter just to get you started talking. You should come to your small group having read those 2 chapters. There are questions at the end, but I'd like you to talk with one another. We're not here to point fingers. I don't care what you thought about Pastor Mark. That was 8 years ago. Okay? We've got to talk about the past, but we've got to look towards the future. And this book is going to help us. It's not going to supply the solution, okay? But he's got a number of ways, 20 ways in here. Well, it says 12 ways to keep yours alive. And they're not, here again, we're a different church. I don't know if you knew that. We're a different church, okay? We are not rural Minnesota, okay? We are not suburban USA. This is a totally different neighborhood. Yeah, and we've got to treat it as such. But we've got to start figuring some things out, all right? I wanted to say, this book does not supply the solutions. We do. And so what I'm asking is you've all been identified by different people on staff to be in a small group with them, to go through 7 weeks. There's 14 chapters, 7 weeks, okay? Because what I'd like to do, what I'd like to see happen, is at the end of those 7 weeks, and as September, October comes, that you will also start a small group. You can handpick anybody you want, but that you'll start a small group Bible study. And you'll take them through this book. We need our whole congregation to hear this, see this, know this. It can't happen in mass numbers. It can't happen on a Sunday morning. Okay, too many people have too many questions. They'll walk out defeated, or they won't come back. Okay, and we can't have that. This is best done within a small group where we can talk to each other, and we can be honest. Like I said, if you're mad, say, you know what, I'm mad. But then let's deal with it. Or this is depressing. Well, this is depressing. I can't help that. But we've lost 83% of our membership. How should we feel? All right? So, let me stop right there and ask you if you have any questions.
Since you've worked with churches before in this same situation,
Yep.
or at least similar,
Yep.
and because we're different and in a more dynamic neighborhood, are we gonna, do you see us having a good shot at resurrecting our congregation if we start reaching out?
Well, that's an excellent question, Frank. Because as I've looked over my ministry of the last 25 years, no, last 15 years. Sorry, 15 years. I've been at 3 congregations, and my job was to close them down because they were dying. They didn't realize they were dying. I often wondered why I was called here. Oh, I'm serious. I was like, I remember Bob, I said, I'm home again. I'm back home. It's good to be home. I'm back to my roots. And I'm glad I'm here. But the last 3 churches I've had to close them. I've had to have a funeral service. It wasn't easy. It's absolutely hard. The one church I started. But it was not born of the Spirit, it was born of the flesh. I had just resigned from the church I was at, and as I resigned, there were a group of people about 2 weeks later that called me up and said, would you come over to our house? They said, we're going to start a new Lutheran church. Would you be our pastor? I said, let me think about it. Okay, I'll be your pastor. Because this is all I ever wanted to do. But I was in no shape to do it. It was born out of rape. All right? That was a group of people that were so hurt by the church that forced me out. It was not born the right way. It was good people. Don't get me wrong. Very good people. But it was not born of the Spirit. And the Holy Spirit did phenomenal things there. But it was not meant to be alive. I had to shut it down. And then I was asked to do an interim at a church. I was there 18 months. And it was very sick. They were down to 40 people. And they were mad, and they were bickering, and they were fighting. And that was all that was left. And understand, when you get down to those numbers, you start cannibalizing each other, okay? And so we had to close those doors. And at the last church I was at, we had an ultimatum. And the ultimatum was to sell the church. If you want to stay alive, find a new pastor. And they decided they didn't want to. I don't always have all the right answers. Not even close. But there are times that I do listen to the voice of God. And He had said, shut it down. And they didn't. And I gave them an ultimatum, and I said, here's your ultimatum. If you want to stay alive, you invite. There was a pastor that actually came here. He had a church here in Brooklyn Center. He wanted to use our building on Sunday morning. I said, I don't have space on Sunday morning. But I know of a church that has a vacancy on Sunday morning down in St. Louis Park. And he went down there, and those 2 churches merged. It was the only way that they could stay alive. So my question is, your question is do I think we have a chance? Yeah. And the reason I think we have a chance is because we have plummeted over the last 20 years. And now we've done this. Now some of you may remember, as I have a PowerPoint on the growth cycle of a church. You're born, you grow, you reach this pinnacle. The pinnacle was in the 90s. All right? If you don't refocus, what will happen is you'll decline. This church is not, it's not as if you didn't have a chance to refocus. There was too many traumatic experiences that you had to focus on. That you never refocused your attention on the community and reaching out. If you don't refocus, you don't redevelop. If you don't redevelop ministries, you don't resurge. You don't take off again. Right now, we're like this. We have the chance to do this, and if we don't do this, we'll do this. 5 to 7 years. Yes.
So many times people in this church have asked me about African community attendance. They asked me what we can do to improve the attendance.
Yep.
And I asked them, I said, our question should go to you. What do you see? What do you see is wrong? I'm an African, but you should see what is going on in the church and see, do you see any growth in the African community attendance? Or do you see any decline? So, and if you're observing anything like a decline, then what is your solution? What are you suggesting? Instead of asking me, you should be asking yourself, what should we do to improve on that decline, to upgrade the attendance? So my problem here is with the African, there have been a lot of problems that I think many people are now observing. Number one, there was this, during the recession, many of them lost their jobs. And then, so they moved out of state, out of Iowa or to North Dakota. North Dakota has a lot of jobs, so there has been an influx of Africans in that area. Okay, but then the complaint that I've gotten from most of them is that there is no outreach to them. People from this church are not reaching out to them. And I have visited other churches, and I noticed people who were really active in our church are members of those churches right now. They have left because we are not being able to reach out to them. No one cares. Right after service, no one calls them. After Sundays, no one talks to them until the next Sunday. During the week, no call, nothing. So I don't know what your statistic is showing about the African attendance since your administration. Is there a decline? Is there a stabilization? Or?
Well, we don't break it down by cultures. Okay, so I don't have a way to answer that. But it's not only the African community, because at one time, quote me if I'm wrong, but there was a Russian community that was in here. There was a Hmong community that was in here. Hispanic. We have so many cultures in this area. So many, but they're not represented. And part of it you'll read in the book, okay? We stop being the culture around the neighborhood. Okay? Now that doesn't mean there's not any Caucasian around the neighborhood. There are, but a lot of this neighborhood is from everywhere else, except from Norway and Germany. Okay? Right? But as a church, we didn't evolve with the community, the culture around us, okay, in any way. So it's one of those things that we have to figure out, and we have to do a better job. Otherwise, we won't have anything left. Yes, Marianne.
Once we have gone through our 7-week course, and then we branch out into our small groups, is there a list that can become available that will keep track of who's gone through the Bible study, so we won't have to go up to, I could go up to my, nope, I already went through, and I could go up to Mary, nope, I already went through.
Well, yeah, what my hope is that after you go through this with one of the staff and we talk about it, you start a small group, that'll be a small group that you'll stay with, okay? And yeah, we'll have a list of those who have, but we're not going to ask you to start a group and then when you're done with that group, start another group. We'd like you to stay with that group and continue to do ministry and reach out. And those are your friends. Those are part of your relationship family. I still have. I started 2 small groups up at Shepherd of the Pines and Rice, and those people, I'm still in contact with them. They are still part of my life in so many different ways because we shared life together. And we need to be able to do that in this church. We need to share life. Church, just think of architecture, okay? For those of you who have been around architecture, back in the day, back in the 40s when you built a home, even the 50s, there was a porch on the front, right? And so that when people drove by, you'd be sitting out on the porch and neighbors talk to each other. And now what do? We put the deck out back and then we put a fence around it, right? We drive in our garage, we hit our garage door, our garage door closes, and we walk in our house, no one ever sees us. We never interrelate with anybody. And that's what's happened in the church. All right? And you know what? I've read all this stuff of why, these churches grow in the big churches now, and they don't concentrate this, but the 39th largest church in the United States is Hope Lutheran Church in Des Moines, Iowa. Okay? If you're ever in Des Moines, go to Hope Lutheran Church, all right? They average 9,000 This was a dying inner city church. And you know what they decided to do? Meet their community. On Sunday morning, every color is in there. I mean, and there are some that are well dressed and some that don't have shine shoes. And yet, they are the 39th largest church in the United States. I'm not saying we're going to be in the top 100, okay? But what I am saying is we need to figure out how do we do this? And it's going to be through small group, okay? It's going to be people meeting people and people taking care of people. Yes, John.
Are we supposed to, in the small groups, have just members, or are we going to reach out to others
Oh, you can definitely reach out to others.
for the small groups?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Well, that first small group that we're going to ask you to do, I'd like you to take more people from our congregation through this book. Okay, so if they're not a member, that's fine. They may not totally understand our problem, but I'd like you to take them through this book. Okay? Yes, Bob.
So I was in private industry, and this bank that I was working for, American Bank in St. Paul, and the bank got into a lot of trouble for doing lots of things incorrectly, to the point where actually the examiners fired the entire executive team of the bank. One day they were there, including the owner. The next day they were gone.
Yep.
The board of directors, they assigned one guy on the board to hire a new president, who then needed to hire a new executive vice president in charge of loans, and a new credit guy, and so forth. And I happened to be one of the managers of a department at the time, and the new guys came in, and he decided, well, you're not going to be managing this anymore. And I had a good attorney friend that I was having lunch with. He says, I know you're going to be really annoyed about this. He says, but my father, when he was like 50 years old, which is about the age I was at that time, he said he got really annoyed. And he told management exactly what he felt about the situation. And he ended up getting fired. And he never, ever had a well-paying job like that again when he was 50. Because my advice to you is, if you don't like it, kind of rest your cards, figure out something else. But if I were you, I would get on board. And you can figure out something down the line. So there were like 300 people in the room. Everybody was annoyed that I was getting demoted. I said, you know, don't feel bad for me. We're trying to make this organization work. I'm on board. Let's just move forward. And actually, the next 10, 12 years were great. I mean, we thrived. The bank did well. Ultimately, we sold out, which actually made my 401k. I sort of rolled the dice and invested in the stock of the bank that bought us, and the stock went up. And I got a few options and all that. But you know, we're comfortable. We're not wealthy, but we're comfortable. But anyway, the point is, and I've told people around here this multiple times. First of all, you need a leader that has a vision. You either got to get on board with the vision. You got three choices. Only two are right. You can either quit, go someplace else where you are willing to work, stay and work, but you can't sit around and crab about, you know, what people are doing. You know, I don't like the color in the hallway. You know, how come we didn't do three air conditioners instead of two? Why did you paint that color? You know, I mean, just, you know, that's my opinion on thing. Actually, when you crab, the people who have done stuff, they kind of lose their energy too.
Right.
You know,
Well, one of the chapters that you'll read in here is the tenure of pastors decreases. Because pastors come in